Okay.
Oh, we ratified 2 out of the process.
Yeah.
That was a good piece of work.
All right, I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Electoral Area Services Committee for August 10th. This meeting isn't meant for general public, but if you have any questions, we have sections on our website, and if you want to appear as a delegation, you are most welcome to do so. I'm going to look at the first item on the agenda. We have a delegation from Freedom Mobile Wireless Telecommunications. Oh, and sorry, apologies. I would love to recognize that we are meeting on the unceded and traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, on whose land the CBRD, we really want to work in partnership as government to government. Our first item on our agenda is the Freedom Wireless Mobile Communication delegation for receipt.
So moved.
Moved. And I'll second. And over to staff to.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I see that Chad is on the line as a delegation, as well as we were expecting Tawny. So I hand it over to them to make their presentation.
Okay, thanks a lot, folks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. I'll share my screen. I've got a short PowerPoint presentation to go over this.
Yeah, we'll
That's
just
okay.
Figure out making you host. Yeah, you should be able to share your screen now.
All right. Can you all see that PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, thanks. And thanks for the opportunity to meet with you folks today. My name is Chad Merlat. I'm representing Freedom Mobile. I am from Cypress Land Services, a consultant for them, and we've done some consultations in the past with the regional district. So we're familiar with you folks and the process there. And part of your process when we propose communication structures is meeting with you folks to just give you an overview of what we're proposing, and also just talk a bit about the community or the consultation process. So if you have questions during this or after, that's great. I'll back up 1 second here. So basically, Freedom Mobile launched their network about 1.5 years ago in the throughout the regional districts, Comox, Courtenay, and the general area. They built about 8 cell sites that service the area. And now they're coming back to sort of fill in the holes that have and areas that have poor service. So they're proposing 2 new structures in the regional district to improve services. And then there's 1 more in Courtenay that's proposed, that will be proposed down the road. So just in general, wireless services are an important part of a community's infrastructure. More and more it's seen as a basic utility, and more and more people are using devices. Pretty much every household has a device now. And they're not using it just for making phone calls, they're using it for data, for basically anything from pictures to emails to videos, all sorts of other things. And it's become more and more important throughout COVID, having good wireless connection, good high-speed internet connection, good internet connection. These companies have heard over and over calls from various communities to improve services throughout COVID. So the 2 projects that we're proposing are in the yellow stars on the map in front of you there. The yellow dots are 2 existing cell sites that they built when they launched their network. And those 2 existing cell sites, one's on the rooftop of the hospital in Comox. The other one's on a rooftop of an industrial building on the corner of Knight and I can't remember the cross street right now. Picard Road. Anyhow, it's just to the west of the airport. It's both of those installations are not really big buildings. The one near the airport is probably an installation that's 10 meters in height. And the one at the hospital is about 15 or 16 meters in height. So the two that we're proposing in the stars are 30-meter monopole structures. One is just on the southwest side of the airport off Knight Road on some agricultural land, and I'll get into more details after. And the other one is on Guthrie Road, again on some rural, it's a rural residential property with just a wooded property. And it's in between two of the subdivisions out there. So this map shows you the need for the service. So the upper left-hand corner, the two red stars indicate where the new cell sites are proposed. Anything in yellow and red is poor or unreliable wireless services. Anything in blue and green is good, reliable wireless service. And we talk about reliable, it's you're able to access the internet, not just for voice, but for data, and not just outside. Of course, most people want to use their phones in buildings and houses. So you're looking at anything in green and blue as good service in homes and buildings and whatnot. So you can see there's some areas of quite a bit of yellow and red on that map on the upper left-hand corner, which shows poor areas of service. And then in the lower left-hand corner, it shows what those new cell sites will do in terms of improved service for the community. No question?
No, I think that was just
Okay.
someone else on the line, but please go ahead.
Okay. So the first site is the one just southwest of the airport. And by the way, we have checked in with the airport to make sure there's no issues with aeronautical safety. It's proposed to be located at 734 Knight Road. It's agricultural use on the property, some barns and outbuildings, and it's at the back of the property, about 100 meters or 80 to 100 meters set off Knight Road. One of your policies is when we do propose new structures, we check in with other communications companies to ensure, for one, we can't use an existing tower in the area, but also if they want to use the tower that we're proposing to build. So we are just checking with those companies now to see if there's a need. There was a project up at the Seal Bay RV Park that we did a couple of years ago. And TELUS did join in on that project, and that's been built out and is providing service for Freedom and TELUS customers up in the regional district to the north there. Anyhow, this map here shows where the structure is proposed, but it also has little pins on the map that show where existing wireless infrastructure is within your community. One of those, the white pin is the existing Freedom site. Green pins are TELUS's service in the area, and a red pin is the Rogers service or infrastructure in the area. So Rogers and TELUS kind of in the middle left-hand side of the map. They have towers side by side. It's about 2 kilometers away from the one we're proposing and too close to the cell site that we've already built to utilize those towers. And there's a huge history with those towers. When Freedom initially launched their network, they looked at using those towers. They're not able to add equipment to those towers because they're too low. So just a bit of background there. And then all the green pins you see in the lower portion of the map, TELUS has built out small cell infrastructure on their utility poles throughout a lot of residential communities, not just in the regional district and surrounding Comox and Courtenay, but throughout British Columbia. So they have a bit of an advantage of adding just small antennas to their existing utility poles throughout residential communities, whereas companies like Rogers and Freedom need to build full-on cell sites to service those areas. This is just a tower profile of what the proposed structure would look like. So it's a tapered steel pole with the antennas at the top. And then the location is in your lower right-hand corner of the map. And that's sort of just an aerial of the property. The tower would be set back at the back of the property. We've entered into a long-term agreement with this property owner to do this. And that's a visual of what the structure would look like from Knight Road if you were looking. It's about 100 meters away. And this is the other project up on Guthrie Road. This one again is, it's a 30-meter pole. I'll get into that in a minute. It's, I think, about 100 or 75 meters setback off of Guthrie Road on kind of a rural residential property that's well treed. This again is just showing you the existing structures or infrastructure in the area. And again, there's really no cell sites to work with in this area to provide service. And all those green pins are those small antennas on utility poles that tell us as throughout the community to service wireless needs. And this is the profile of this proposed tower. Again, it's 30 meters. And you can see in the lower right-hand corner, that's where the tower will be located. I don't think we have to remove any trees or anything like that. We're just setting it in amongst the trees. So the trees will screen, you know, a good portion of the tower from view of the public, especially on Guthrie Road. And that's a visual of the structure. The trees are about 23, 24 meters at most in this area. And then the structure, just the antennas will be above the tree line on the property. This installation, we've flush mounted the antennas right to the pole to kind of reduce visibility as much as possible, given that we're closer to residential properties in the area. So instead of having a kind of a bigger steel structure at the top of the tower, we're proposing to mount those antennas right to the tower, and we can paint the tower green to match the trees and blend it in with as best as possible with the area. One of the major concerns typically when we're doing consultations is health and safety. And I don't know if you're aware, but Health Canada regulates health and safety when it comes to wireless devices and base stations such as cell towers. And these cell towers are fully in compliant with Health Canada's Safety Code 6 limits. In reality, it's very low energy. Typically, by the time the energy off of one of these towers reaches a neighboring property, it's hundreds or thousands of times below the allowable limit. So it's very low energy. Most Canadians, I'd say 80 to 85% of Canadian population lives within a few hundred meters of a cell site. They just probably don't know it, but most in urban and suburban areas live in close proximity to these things, and they've been operating safely for decades now. And when it comes to the consultation, the regional district doesn't really have a process, but they do require us to do a public open house. And Industry Canada, the federal regulator for us, does require notification to adjacent properties and advertisement in local papers. So we will be holding a public open house. We will be notifying everybody within 100 meters of the installation in writing, as well as placing notifications in the local paper of the proposal and the public open houses. After that's done, we will report back to you folks through staff, and we'll be looking forward to moving forward with the projects then, and we can report back what community feedback was from the project. When we are notifying, when we're talking notifying 100 meters, the project on Knight Road, there'll be 11 properties that we'll be notifying directly by a mail out. And the one on Guthrie, there'll be 6 properties within that 100 or 105 meter notification area. And then again, advertisements will go in the newspaper. And that's all I've got. So I'm happy to answer any questions or take any feedback you folks may have, and I appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you very much, Tad. We have a question from Director Grieve.
Thanks. Oops. Thanks very much for the presentation. Couple of things. First, you mentioned Health Canada as a regulatory body, but when you talk about Knight Road, have you been in contact with NAVCAN? Because as you know, that's an aerodrome for the CFP Comox, and we had a situation about 10 years ago when a couple of Douglas fir trees grew too tall into the airspace, and they mandated, well, it ended up grounding a lot of flights from WestJet off the airbase because they needed a 400-foot visual contact with the ground. So, you know, it's a big issue. I just wonder if you've actually contacted NavCan about the sighting of the night road tower.
Yeah, that's a good question. And as I mentioned, we were in contact with the airport to make sure we don't impact them, which we don't. But we've also been in contact. We just started the process with NavCan. There's a process in place that we go through for every tower. So we'll be going through that. That takes a couple of months. That's part of our consultation process. So we'll report back on that when we've got feedback from them. As well, we make application to Transport Canada as well. So that is part of the process. We haven't got our application approved as of yet by NavCan, but I don't suspect any problems because we've been in contact with the airport already. But we'll certainly follow up on that once we know more.
Yeah, I would suggest that if you're going to run into any problems at all, it will be NavCan.
Yeah.
They overrule even the base commander.
Yeah.
And the other one is more to staff. Will this be going out to our APC in referrals?
Madam Chair, I'll just refer that question to Ton True to answer with respect to the process the regional district undertakes.
Good morning, through the CEO to the chair and to the directors. Yeah, this there will be a referral that will be sent to the APC. And then the next step would be if this committee wants to move forward, they would request a letter of concurrence to be sent to the higher ends who will approve the towers.
Ton, while you're here, a question I had was around the Knight Road property being in the ALR. Does it have to go to the Land Commission as well?
I could answer that one if you folks want.
Yeah, go ahead, Chad.
Sorry, yeah. I mean, they're an allowable use in the ALR. ALR changed their rules around it a few years ago, and really the only time we need to get an approval from ALR is if we're taking off a significant amount of fill for the project. I don't think in this case we would. We're using existing access, and it's a foundation, so we'd probably be below that limit, but we do an assessment of that. We do a lot of projects on ALR property and lands, and they recognize the use is required and it takes up minimal use typically. And in this instance, we stick to the perimeters of the property, so we're not impacting agricultural uses, especially on not maybe on this property, but on larger agricultural properties. We don't put the tower sort of in the middle of a farmable area or something like that. But yeah, there is a process for the ALC that we go through, and we will be covering that off as well. I don't know if the regional district has any other requirements, but that's the ALR requirement.
To the chair, I think through the process, staff would send a referral to the ALC to ensure that we would also receive comments from them to move forward with a staff report.
Okay, great. Yes, I noticed that the tower wasn't really on the prime agricultural land. It was in a built area, but it helps to kind of check off that box. I don't see any other questions. Anything else? Well, thank you, Chad, for your presentation. And
Thanks,
on
folks.
receipt, is there anyone opposed? That's carried. And we'll look forward to the recommendations coming back and from all of the advisory committees. So thank you very much. Great. Moving on, we've got the management report for August 2021 for receipt. Moved and seconded. And are there any questions or comments on the management report? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. Minutes from the Advisory Planning Commission.
Move both minutes.
Moved and seconded to approve both sets of minutes. Comments, questions? Seeing and hearing none. And all in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Item number 2, Electoral Area A Development Permit DB 2A21 8991 Island Highway South 3L Developments for receipt. Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Jody McLean, Planner, is here to present this report and introduce the applicant's representative.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Jody.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, and to the directors. On the telephone Zoom link, we have Dr. Rob Buchan, the agent on behalf of the applicant. Lisa, can you zoom to page 11 on the PDF there, the last page? This is a variance addressing road frontage, but it's best understood from a bigger picture point of view. So there currently exists 2 lots. And they've always been owned by the same owner, lots 15 and 29. They're separated by that green line you see there. The owner is considering selling these separately in the future, meaning that the land between the rail line and that green line would become stranded. Only accessible by applying to the Island Corridor Foundation for a rail crossing or through an easement from Wavell Road down through 15 to that land. To remedy this, the applicant is like to add that land to the northern lot, meaning that no road crossing, no rail crossing or long easement would be required. However, during these lot line adjustments, the zoning regulations must be abided by. This includes the 10% lot, 10% frontage that must be applied to all new lots. And this is what allows road frontage to be dedicated at the time of lot line adjustments and subdivisions. In this case, the owners are requesting no further roads be dedicated as a result of those lot line adjustments. It approximately has 4% of its perimeter as frontage. The Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure does have the ability to require additional road frontage, but in this case is not requesting any new. Both the Area A and the Agricultural Advisory Planning Commissions, because this is inside the Agricultural Land Reserve, they both reviewed this proposal and both recommended approval. Madam Chair, a copy of the draft permit that would approve this proposal is included in your package, and staff is recommending approval also.
Thank you. And we have a question from Director Arbor.
Yes, thank you. It does seem to me like it's a pretty straightforward proposal, and I appreciate that the Wavell Road is now better indicated on the map. We struggled a bit with this at our APC meeting, but it clearly shows the 2 points of access and the bisecting ENN railway. So I'm in favor of moving this forward.
Okay, I don't see questions. I had one question for you, Jody. There was a comment in the minutes from the Ag Advisory Committee on this regarding that the variance prevents taking up farmland for driveway/road purposes. Would you be able to clarify that comment?
Yeah, thanks. So one of the consequences is if this does get refused, they could remedy this by applying to dedicate road along the perimeter. That would require Agricultural Land Commission approval. It could mean a long driveway across the farmland to access that land. So that this variance, moving that land to the northern, would help avoid that.
Okay, so we're actually supporting not having so much driveway if this is approved. Okay. Any other comments or questions? We'll vote on receipt first. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. And there is a recommendation. Moved by Director Arbor, seconded by Director Grieve. Any comments or questions on the recommendation? And that is that the Comox Valley Regional District approve the DVP that we're discussing, and that the corporate legislative officer be authorized to execute the permit. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. Thank you.
Madam Chair, on the next matter, it deals with the application to the Agricultural Land Commission, for which I exclude myself from these considerations. Alana Mullally is here in the event that there are any questions, but Jody McLean will be introducing this report.
Thank you. So on that item number 3, Electoral Area B, ALR non-adhering residential use on 5028 Headquarters Road by Landers for receipt. Moved and seconded, and over to Jody.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the Zoom, we also have Kyla Landers. She's the applicant for this application. The options we have here are to forward the application to the Agricultural Land Commission with comments and recommendations, or to refuse the application. The applicant here is seeking to begin construction of a new house while still living in the old house. And they're seeking to begin construction before December 31st, when the regulatory changes addressing housing in the ALR are set to come into place. While the CVRD zoning does make provisions for this activity that she is applying for, the Agricultural Land Commission currently requires an application, because technically, temporarily, it would be 2 dwellings, one being lived in and one being constructed in an area where only 1 dwelling is permitted. The Agricultural Advisory Planning Commission reviewed this proposal and they recommended approval. The regional agrologist also reviewed and provided some comments, noting the proposed location appears to be the most logical placement for the residents and will minimize the impact on agriculture. Madam Chair, based on these factors, staff recommendation is to forward the application to the Agricultural Land Commission, supporting the proposal as proposed.
Thank you. And I know, Kyla, you're on the call. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to that presentation?
No, Jody summed it up pretty much.
Great. Do any of the directors have questions or comments for the applicant? I just had one question, Kyla. What when you do finish building your new house, I wasn't 100% clear what your plan was for the old one.
Well, currently my budget doesn't allow for any renovations in addition to a new house. So my plan is to use this old house, or decommission it and use it as like a farm office and storage area.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I'll excuse you from the Zoom, and we'll
Okay.
vote on receipt then. All those in favor for receipt? Any opposed? And that's carried. And we have a recommendation. Oh, sorry, before we go there, we have to receive the correspondence from our agrologist. Moved, and I can second. Is there anyone opposed to receipt? That's carried. And sorry, now we'll move on to the recommendation. Moved and seconded by Director Grieve. Are there any comments or questions? All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you very much. Item number 4, Electoral Area C, site-specific exemption for floodplain management bylaw 9520 Riverbend Road by Miller. Moved and seconded. And over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Brian Chow is here to introduce this report and answer any of your questions.
Sorry, go ahead, Brian, thanks.
To the CEO, to the chair and committee. First of all, I noticed that the owner, Mike Miller, as well as the agent, John Gower, are on Zoom. The subject property is located at 9520 Riverbend Road. and is approximately 0.3 hectares in area. This property is bound by Oyster River to the northeast and a highway ditch across Riverbend Road. So there are two watercourses in question here. The applicants propose to remove the existing mobile home and then replace it with a single detached dwelling with a garage and an accessory building, which is shown as figure 3 in the staff report. According to the Comox Valley Floodplain Management Bylaw, bylaw number 600, there is a minimum setback of 60 meters, so 60 meters, from the present natural boundary of Oyster River. The proposed single detached dwelling is just beyond 30 meters from Oyster River. Therefore, there's a need to have a site-specific exemption to the floodplain management bylaw for this proposal. In support of their application, the applicants submitted an engineering report, and the engineering report looked at the minimum flood construction level of the proposed buildings, and the habitable areas of the house will meet the minimum flood construction level. And the engineer also looked at, with the reduced setback, whether there would be any concern. The engineer concluded that the proposed single detached dwelling is considered to be safe for the use intended with a reduced Oyster River setback, and provided that the conditions are followed in the report. Therefore, planning staff supports this application, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And does the applicant or Mr. Gower have any comments on the application?
Good morning to the chair and the directors. I've been working with the Millers on the design of the home and the accessory building on this property. And I just wanted to say that the house that we're proposing replaces a mobile home that has been there for many years, and that there's really no other spot for the house on the property that A, maintains a view of the river, and B, doesn't require the removal of a whole bunch of trees. And so it's kind of a logical place for the house. And I think that we've put it in a position where it's not going to be endangered by the river and nor cause any harm to the environment. And I think it's the right place for the house.
Thank you. Do the directors have any questions for the applicant or the agent? Okay, I don't see any. On receipt, all those in favor then? Any opposed? That's carried. And we have a recommendation.
I'll move it.
Moved and seconded that the CBRD grant an exemption to bylaw number 600, the flood management bylaw, to permit the development of this single detached dwelling. And there are conditions for this site-specific exemption that are attached as well. Any comments or questions on that recommendation? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Right, we're moving along at a pace. Great. Item number 5, Electoral Area C DVP for 23282 Macaulay Road for receipt. Moved and seconded and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Dylan Thiessen is here to present this report and answer any of your questions.
Welcome, Dylan.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for that introduction, Russell. Through the chair to the directors, staff have received a farmland production development permit for a property towards the end of Macaulay Road, which shares one side yard lot line and its rear yard lot line with an ALR zoned property. The subject property is approximately 0.2 hectares in size and is zoned rural 8. And the proposed development includes a single detached dwelling and related site works. The dwelling will be located approximately 34.5 meters from the rear lot line and 18 meters from the side lot line that is shared with the ALR property. The intent of the farmland protection development permit is to mitigate conflict between agricultural and non-agricultural uses, in this case, residential, by establishing buffers between those uses. There's an existing fence and vegetated buffer which will remain intact. This file did go to the most recent Agricultural Advisory Planning Commission meeting, and the Agricultural APC did vote to support the application going forward as proposed. Additionally, the ALR property is covered by a wetland and is owned by the Nature Trust of BC, whose primary goal is environmental conservation. It is unlikely that the property will be actively farmed because of this state. And an employee of the Nature Trust noted that the trust has no issues with the proposed development, only asking that existing vegetation remain if possible, or be replanted if it's required to be removed during the development process. Staff support the application and recommend that the EASC support and the board approve the application as presented, as the dwelling is sited as far from the farm property as can be based on the subject property size and shape. The farmland property is not likely to be farmed in the future, and existing fencing and vegetation is to remain in place, creating a suitable buffer. I will note that the applicants, Tyson Monroe and Michael Donner, are both on Zoom right now.
Great, thank you. And would the applicant like to add anything to that presentation?
Yeah, I'll say just kind of reiterating what Dylan said, that in this case, there is no conflict that needs to be mitigated with buffers or otherwise, as the adjacent ALR is not nor could be used for agriculture or aquaculture, and that this is the last lot in a row of lots between Oral Lake and Macaulay Road to be developed, as all the rest of them have been previously developed.
Thank you. Do the directors have any questions of the applicant? Director Grieve.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. No, I think that this came up at the AAP, and unless you're going to be commercially growing skunk cabbage or something like that, or maybe bulrushes, I don't think there'd be too much agricultural activity there. But at least at this point, who knows? I mean, with the way things are going, it may be a semi-arid desert in a year or two. So, but for now, I think it's a really nice little spot, and certainly I wish you all the best building your home.
Thank you.
Thanks. I had a question for you, Tyson. The Nature Trust comment around revegetating, if you do need to take out any trees or bushes, is that something that you would be prepared to do, or is that a plan?
Yeah, there wouldn't be any trees or bushes that would need to be removed, and everything will kind of be addressed in the riparian development permit that we will have to go through.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll excuse you from the table then. We'll vote on receipt. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. And we have a recommendation. Moved and seconded. Comments or questions on the recommendation to approve the DBP? Seeing and hearing none. All of those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. We're going to move on to the Denman and Hornby Island high-speed internet assent vote for receipt. Moved, seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Jake Martins is here to introduce this report and outline to you the recommendations that are included and answer any of your questions.
Over to you, Jake.
Thanks, Russell. Madam Chair, before the committee is a report that follows the direction provided last month, in which the committee gave direction to staff to pursue the development of a service and the necessary financial instruments in order to provide a capital contributions toward the development of a high-speed internet service on Denman and Hornby Islands. The pursuit of this service follows the development of the General Connected Coast project, in which it's a $45 million project to lay essentially a subsea cable, fiber optic cable from Prince Rupert south along the coast, and then circling around Vancouver Island. In order for local residents to connect to this cable, what's been termed kind of last mile infrastructure is required in order to extend the line into the community in which residents can then connect to. With regard to this, there's just been a recent announcement of approximately $5 million grant provided by the province to the City West, which is the cable and telephone company, to help fund this last mile infrastructure. And as part of this, the community contribution of the outstanding portion is required. So in this regard, part of the staff report brings together a number of legislative instruments associated with an assent vote that would be required for the establishing bylaw to establish that eligible service and raise appropriate funds to enter into the capital contribution agreement with City West Cable and Telephone Corporation and to borrow up to 10% of the community contribution as noted. As elector approval is required for all three of these initiatives, an assent vote is proposed for November the 27th to seek such approval. Assent voting generally follows the same rules and regulations as general local elections, and so a number of recommendations have been detailed in this report to address the requirements, including direction for the assent vote for each of the noted bylaws, the single question that will be placed on the ballot for the voters to consider. Thirdly, the approval of the synopsis of the bylaw for notice purposes, the appointment of the chief and deputy chief election officers, and finally, the commitment of funds to support staffing and other requirements associated with the voting. It's also noted that an information campaign has been generally described in this report to inform the residents of this, of course, opportunity and of the general parameters of the proposal. With that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Jake. And Director Arbor, no doubt has a question.
Thank you to staff for the fairly fast work on this, not only in the last month, but I think over the last 6 months as we saw this opportunity arise. And I really want to thank the groups on Hornby and Denman that have been working towards bringing high-speed internet to the islands, to most households, if not all households, for a long time. The Denman Island Ratepayers Association had an internet committee, and HiSeek, another one of our affiliate organizations, really spearheaded that effort around this particular opportunity. And then finding City West, which is actually a municipality-owned enterprise by the city of Prince Rupert, really lays the ground for a true public service around internet, which is really exciting, not only for our community, but for others. I think I'd add to Jake's remarks that something that really hardens me in this project and our participation in it, should it win at referendum, is that over 39 First Nation communities are going to get connected through Connected Coast. And I think our participation enables part of that to happen as well, should it proceed. In terms of the service, I think it's a very extensive report which people can look at, and I see that we also laid out the general terms and agreements around that we would have it with City West. We're looking at a 10-year contribution from all residents at about $39 a year to get this going. But the unique thing is that it looks like we will have a 20% profit share in the enterprise. So it's quite likely that this will pay for itself. I'm sure more information will come to the communities on this. So yeah, very exciting. We're very pleased to host Minister of Municipal Affairs, Rosie Osborne, on Hornby this weekend. We had the Vancouver Island Regional Library. We had the Health Network. We had so many people, a big roundtable, really welcoming this news. But I agree the next couple of months will be critical to do public engagement so people really understand what the value proposition is. Thanks so much to staff again.
Director Arbor. Director Grieve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, first of all, I'd like to congratulate the director and staff for working on this so diligently and bringing it to this point. I can tell you that residents of Area C will be looking at this with great interest. We have a similar blind spot, dead spot, or whatever along the Plateau Road, Piercy Road, Dove Creek, Burns Road, Stapley Road, etc. So, you know, our problem, though, is we suffer from the fact that we have very low population in that area and great distances between mailboxes. So I'm just wondering, potentially, it's probably in the report, but I'm going to be lazy and ask, how many residents are we looking at here total?
Staff.
We've not provided an estimate of the eligible electors in this report, certainly, but
Round figures,
around 2,000-ish.
2,000. That's still more. Okay. Well, once again, yeah, thank you for all your work, and we'll be watching this with much interest. Thank you.
Back to Jake.
Thanks. I'll just add, Madam Chair, that the one aspect here that I think Director Arbor has touched on is the potential revenue generating aspect of this. And so we have included in the service establishment bylaw, part of the purpose is not just to provide that capital contribution, but also then in anticipation that we will have revenue to distribute grants and other forms of assistance to the community. And so those details haven't been completely detailed at this point. We're just anticipating that being a beneficial step at some point in the future when the time comes. So just want to make that clear.
Great, thank you. And I'll just comment that, this project really does tick all the boxes for me. We've had numerous delegations from Denman Hornby around the need for high-speed internet, and the fact that, other levels of government have come and we've got this wonderful project to connect the coast. It seems like all of the stars have aligned, and I really do hope that the residents of Denman Hornby take advantage of this situation to connect themselves. So I look forward to the upcoming vote and fully support as well. I don't see any other questions. So on receipt, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. And we have a number of recommendations. So we'll start. Oh, and sorry, we'll receive the news release from the Ministry of Citizen Services from August 5th. Moved, seconded, and all those in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. So move recommendation 1. Yeah. And seconded, and that's regarding the sections 269 and 407 of the Local Government Act, that with the participating area approval is in respect to the following proposed bylaws. Any comments or questions on that recommendation? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, and that's carried unanimously. Number 2, moved and seconded. And this is the wording that will go to assent voting. Comments or questions? Sorry, Director Arbor. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe a quick question to staff on that one. And I could have done it in the information session, but I'm going to get Jake to get it up again, I guess. In terms of the 20-year agreement with City West, so we have a 10-year repayment schedule. So can you enlighten the 20-year agreement nature? I just couldn't reconcile those two things. Oh, yeah, if that makes sense.
Through the chair. Yeah, this was originally anticipated with a 20-year agreement, which follows, I think that, for better or worse, the template that is being developed across the Connected Coast project. And so even though there's only a 10-year window there, I think providing us with the 20 years provides us opportunities if there is a need for a change or any kind of other further investment to potentially come back and look to amend that agreement over time. So I don't think there was any specific intention to not have those two aligned, but more just utilize the greater time frame as that's been what's developed in elsewhere.
Follow-up, Director Arbor?
And a quick follow-up, because this is obviously infrastructure that would serve the communities for decades and decades to come. That's why I'm asking those questions. In the event that there was a change of ownership at City West, is it safe to assume that all of our agreements with the company would carry over to the new company?
Yeah, certainly there's contemplation of that within the agreement itself, that the parties would work together with your notice and other means to shift the responsibilities, the commitments to any new party that may take ownership or otherwise, if that were to occur, even though, as you mentioned earlier, it is a company that's owned by a local government.
Yeah, no, my hope is that they will remain, but
yeah,
always having that that's plan B. Thank you so much.
No other questions. So we'll move on on the recommendation. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Recommendation 3 is moved and seconded. Comments or questions? These are all the bylaws that will be established. Okay, all those in favor? opposed, and that's carried unanimously. Recommendation number 4, moved and seconded, that Mr. Jake Martins is appointed as Chief Election Officer and Lisa Dennis as Deputy Chief Election Officer. Comments, questions, and Director Arbor.
Thank you. That's great to have the two of you. Just while we're on that topic, typically or at times we've hired outside consultants to actually conduct the vote and independent consultants. Will this be the case as well here?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, we will be engaging some additional resources to assist us with this. That includes, of course, individuals that will work at the polling stations on both Denman and Harvey Islands during the Ascent voting day, but also some general just support with taking this on. So yes, that is contemplated.
Thank you. No other questions? All those in favor of recommendation 4? Any opposed? And that's carried. And we have recommendation number 5. Moved and seconded, and this is referring to the funding of this assent vote that's coming from the feasibility service, function 154 and 155. Director Arbor.
Thank you. Is this drawing from purely the 2021 budgets, or do we have to draw from future budgets for this one?
We'll just, who wants to answer that? I'm going to get it to Jake first.
My understanding is this from the 2020 budget, but I'll defer to Mariah for if she has anything further.
My apologies to the chair, to Director Arbor. Are you talking, can you clarify what you were speaking about?
So we're going to draw from the feasibility study budgets for Hornby and Denman, and thanks for correcting me, Jake. Is this all contained in the 2020 budget, or do we have to draw from next year?
Oh, okay, thank you. The feasibility studies are within the 2021 budget. There are funds allocated for these emerging initiatives, so you do have funds within that to use.
Yes. Yeah. Great, thanks for that clarification. Any other questions? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried unanimously. Item number 7, permissive tax exemption for Sunnydale Golf Course Society 2022 for receipt. Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. There are 2 similar applications for organizations that receive these exemptions on a regular basis. This is Sunnydale, and then item 8 is Union Bay. Staff reports are attached. We can answer any of your questions, but we don't have anything to present to you other than to answer any concerns or questions that you might have.
Thank you. Do any of the directors have a question on the first permissive tax exemption? Okay, not since last year. I actually did. I was looking at what we would be losing in terms of taxes, and it's quite substantial. I have to admit I'm not a golfer, so this is not a sport that I totally get. I get it, but what I didn't see on the staff report was how many people are actually benefiting from being members of Sunnydale. Do staff have any idea?
I'll just refer that to Mariah Fort, our CFO.
And another question, if you're there, like I was assuming, because of 2020 and COVID, that the society may have been in fairly dire straits. But thinking again, I think golfing was maybe quite popular. It was one of those sports that was outdoors and you didn't probably have to mask. So do we have any idea of the financial situation of the society at all?
Through the chair to Director Hamir, their financials appear to be that they actually had a stronger year because I think people are outside and they're recreating more. So just as a trend, their May 31st, 2020 financials year to date were $170,000 of revenue, and their May 31st, 2021 were $305,000. So they did indicate they were in a better position, but what we do see with their financials over time is that they essentially reinvest those funds back into, programming, for staffing and things to manage that, as well as, their application really speaks to that they use these funds to reinvest back into the greens and the infrastructure. So, typically they're ending at a sort of a more of a break-even position year over year. And as far as memberships go, I don't have that in front of me, but I can follow up on that.
Okay, it's not something that I was going to pull the rug out in front and from under the society this year, because this is sort of just coming out. But I would like to kind of have a look at this. It's a very significant piece of property in the Comox Valley, and would like to know like just how many people are benefiting it, versus a park, or if we turn this into something else. Keeping in mind, I understand it's federally owned. This is not a decision that we'd be able to make, but yeah, I just would like to keep that on our radar as an opportunity. Yeah, I'll leave it there. So that's my only comment. So thank you for that clarification, Mariah. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, on receipt, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. There's a recommendation.
I'll move it.
Moved and seconded that we pursue the permissive tax exemption. Questions or comments? Director Arbour.
I'm just thinking if this comes back next year, it might be good to have a delegation that come and present and explain a little more to us how the society works and the benefits.
Great, that would be a great idea. Thank you. If staff could reach out to the society so that we get a better idea of what's going on. Thanks. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the recommendation? Any opposed? And that is carried. And we're on to the Union Bay Historical Society tax exemption for 2022 for receipt. Moved and seconded. Any other comments? No. On receipt then, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And there is that recommendation. Moved and seconded that the Union Bay Historical Society receive that tax exemption for 2022. Comments? And Director Arbour.
Just a slightly trivial comment, but one thing I really like about the Historical Society is they're one of the historical society, which I believe has the greatest social media presence. And they keep pulling all these stories of old Union Bay in the 1800s and early 1900s. So they're really bringing their museum and historical society outside and educating the community around the roots of not just Union Bay. A lot of their stuff touches on the Royston and Fanny Bay and Denman Island as well. So really cool work. And I thought I'd just mention that in case you guys want to check that out.
Great. Thank you for pointing it out. I'll have to find them on social media. On the recommendation then, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. Do we want to take a break or move on? A break? Okay. Why don't we take a break till 5 after? Is that okay? 5 after 11?
Internally dealt with, all right? We got one.
Electricity, start taxing electricity.
Exactly, as we should.
I'll call the meeting back to order so that we can get into the conversation that we're already starting in. So we have the Communityworks Fund status report for receipt. Moved and seconded and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. Mariah Ford, CFO, will present this report and answer any of your questions.
Thanks, Mariah.
Thank you very much. And through the chair, today we have our Communityworks Funds report. We typically come to you twice a year to provide you an update on where the allocations are and how the spending is occurring. In this mid-year report, we also wanted to bring to light that UBCM has been inquiring to local governments about the status of funds, particularly with the quite large allocations across local governments of unspent funds, with the end of our agreement coming at the end of March 2024. So they have indicated that they're sort of researching to see, what's the value of the funds, being sort of unallocated and allowed to be allocated to different local projects versus an allocation, application-based program. I did inquire if they would be looking to extend the agreement, after the 10 years, and they said that's a possibility. But I think because of the unspent funds, they're really kind of questioning what the value is and want to make sure. So we have proposed to the directors to consider going into the fall into financial planning is considering allocating all of their funds to the end of March 2024 to be able to speak to UBCM's doing some surveys and outreach and saying, yes, we have committed those funds. They are valuable to our local areas. So we've recommended that you consider that going into financial planning. And, those funds can be used, they're quite open for core service upgrades. We have some major infrastructure needs for sewer and water in some of our settlement nodes, including Saratoga Beach and South Sewer and Water. Also, too, there's lots of opportunity here to drive forward some of the strategic initiatives of the board, particularly around climate change. Working with staff, we sort of did some outreach on this. There's electric vehicle charging stations that could be invested in across the areas, electric buses and fleet, broadband connectivity, corporate energy plan improvements, active transportation hubs. So there's quite a lot of need that we can quickly spend these funds if we so wished. Also, too, there's some potential here to do some regional initiatives. So we wanted to partner up with our member municipalities to allocate funds together for some regional projects. That also could be an opportunity. So, going into this planning session, we have around $3 million of funds unallocated, and we expect to receive another $3 million to the end of the agreement. So $6 million, $6.5 that could be allocated to particular projects. So we had thought that a dedicated session in the fall going to financial planning with EA directors would be helpful to really kind of determine what your needs and focus areas might be.
Great, thanks, Marianne. I can see Director Arbor is already chomping.
Yes, thanks. And the answer to that question, those funds are absolutely invaluable to communities, especially I think in rural areas. So helpful on so many projects and allows us to do partnerships as well. I think if I look at one question I'll have actually is FCM is actually currently lobbying pretty hard to make the doubling of the funds a permanent thing. So I'm wondering if our projections are based on the existing agreement or build in the potential that the next 4 years will also be doubled. I'm actually, okay, I haven't had a meeting yet with them, but from the initial conversations I've had with some of the members, it's looking quite plausible that we'll see a doubling of the funds being a permanent thing. And which would be great going into the next round of agreement for 10 years, which is coming up in 2024. Hornby and Denman, I think I'm struggling because there's too many projects and we've been funding them as they come. But what I notice so basically I'm not seeing a big budget balance. You are right that there's monies that will accumulate, but I think it's at an acceptably low level right now. In the rest of Area A, I think the story I have is probably similar to Area B and Area C in the sense that we've been earmarking very large amounts for very large projects. In my area, it's the sewage project coming south. There's a lot of money allocated to that. And it has been on my mind the last couple of years, if those projects don't realize, can we pivot and distribute those funds to other projects before the expiry of the agreement. So I think it's very timely that you engage with us today to have those discussions. They're not easy discussions to have. And in terms of locking funds, if we have a session like that, it may be difficult to do, but having an orientation is good, and plans and scenarios. I'll give you an example. When I was reading around the electric stations, for example, which will be a topic in the next item as well. You know, local government is bearing the cost of building that infrastructure across North America, and we haven't found ways to really incentivize the private sector to take up the torch. Tesla is the only one that's done it. Everyone else is relying on local government who are installing these stations and or other organizations or private companies that are not in that business might do it. But things can change. So when you say $100,000 for, do we want a fast charger on Hornby and Denman? Absolutely we do. Do we want the electric buses? Absolutely we do. But when I think about these types of allocation, maybe the buses will come from BC Transit if those services change to BC Transit over the course of those 4 years. If you think of the charging station, maybe we can craft a partnership with BC Hydro so they install this station at no cost. So there's just uncertainty so I think that in the session we'll really need to, if we can come in with a bit of a shorter list of likely things so that we can really test them out, each of them, what's the likelihood that we will draw the funds versus not, including our large projects, that would be really helpful. So I'm totally in favor of having that session. And then the last one, which was weighing on my mind too, is we are at the year of mandate, in our last year of our political mandate. So to tie the hands of the next crew, whether it be us or others, is also weighing a little bit on my mind, because they are funds that are flexible to provide orientation to strategic priorities. And it's presumable that, or at least it's cautious to think that the future board may or may not have the exact same priorities as we do. So just a few things that I thought I'd weigh in today, but overall, I think it's really worth having the discussion.
Thanks, Director Harbour. Director Creed.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. You know, people often forget that almost 2/3 of all infrastructure in Canada is owned, built, maintained by local government. I always think in terms of, you know, big splashy federal airports and what have you, but we're the ones that are actually doing all the heavy lifting down here. And I'm going to speak a little bit to that later in the meeting, but I think that when I see core services, I think that really narrows it down. And as municipal governments, local governments, that order of government, that, you know, a lot of this falls on us. And that's our primary goal, is to deliver those core services. What I wanted to find out was, obviously, fire halls aren't in here again. I know we actually brought that up, and I was on FCM, and there was quite a pushback from Ontario. I guess they have a little different structure there. And it's saying that, well, that's the same as police departments. Well, of course, it's not. You know, it's more like emergency services. I think core service and strategic plans, which goes to show how important and broad strategic planning should be. And my colleague talked about incentivizing the private sector. I mean, there's $1 million question right there. Can we go 50-50? I know at one time earlier on in the Liberal government, they were talking about some grants that were contingent on 50-50 private sector partnership. So some way to bring the private sector in on some of this stuff. So it's going to be an interesting times we're going into in more ways than one. So I do applaud the government for changing the actual scope on this a little bit, and it's not contingent on gasoline anymore, which is something else we'll get into later on in the meeting. We've got you know, secure funding that's based on population going to the local order of government where we can put it to work, doing the very best dollar per delivery of service for our constituents. So I think that's very wise rather than filtering it down through the province, and even though it does filter down through the province. But yeah, so this is all very exciting, and I'm looking at sitting on a pot of $2,036,610.55. So I can see lots of good things we can do for our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. And I'm going to add my 2 cents in as well. So yes, I am going to concur that I think a session prior to our strategic planning would be really helpful. I agree in the first point that I made, when I was taking my notes, reading the staff report, that I didn't really want our Communityworks funding to be stranded with the large projects, the way that Director Arbour just described. Socking it away and then potentially not having other levels of government put in the dollars means that the money doesn't get spent. So I am leaning towards the smaller projects that we can pay outright with, that do meet our strategic plans. All of the electric vehicle fast charging, all of that. I look forward to the discussion around it. And I just wanted to add one item that I don't know if we caught anywhere. And, we've done this strategic plan and needs assessment for a food hub. And I think the issue has been where and what facility, and maybe that facility doesn't currently exist. And could those dollars be used to build something, for example, on the exhibition grounds to meet the needs of the community? So something like that. And I know we're going to be potentially getting a visitor center back into the hands of the RD, and that may require some upgrades as well. So I just want to earmark that there certainly will be projects that will jump up as having a higher need, and we could spend the money right away. But look forward to the discussions. And Director Arbour.
Yeah, thanks. Since you added a bit to the project list, which I thought were good projects, I'll have a couple of things too. In terms of, well, first of all, the second part of the staff report is really looking at the 560,000 that we're actually not allocating to the office project. So for 2 years, I've been telling the public how financially wise building this building was. And I've been saying, we had to put a 1.5 million. I've told everyone 1.5 million. Now it's 1 million that we've had to put in. I guess the rest is probably through debt, I imagine, has had to be covered or whatnot. I'm not quite sure, but we'll have to find that out later, maybe. In terms of the projects, I mean, we have Howie Simmons here, the acting general manager of community services, and I'm sure you would be fully aware of the support in the conversation in the department about the Union Bay Playground as a potential candidate for Communityworks. He's not. But there's sometimes those very small projects, but what will be really hard to do will be that risk assessment. If staff can come really prepared to say, of course, we want to put all these monies toward these big engineering projects, but especially on the sewage side, would we be able, like we're hearing our CFO say, if you're not spending those funds, then what happens? By 2014, I would really want to have a clear answer whether it's a risk to lose the funds if we don't spend them by 2024. If we would get extensions or whatnot, this will be critical information to decision making. And my last point is I would change the recommendation 1, and I can make it unless Chair or Dr. Greer have other comments. Instead of that a dedicated session to allocate the remaining, I would say that a dedicated session to consider allocation of the remaining funds, because right now it just says we're going to allocate it and that's it. But I still want to have a discussion around both the politics and the project risk assessments and all those different things. I don't think we'll nail it all down in one session is what I'm trying to say, unless staff thinks that we really should.
Steph, want to comment on the need to nail down?
No, I think that's good advice. To consider, not commit yourself to allocating every ounce at that particular meeting. Yeah, that's reasonable.
Right. Do you see that we need to have a few strong projects though on the list, or like how much of a, like, what is the feedback from UBCM and around the need to allocate the funds?
To the chair, I think they're doing some surveys and reach out to see. So I think the more we can show some commitments to projects, I think the better. What I would recommend is that leading a strategic planning, maybe we have a dedicated session to discuss and sort of really get a feel from the directors of where you're feeling you may want to allocate. And then that will really inform staff as we build your financial plan, because there's quite a few needs across the financial plan. And then if we know kind of where you want to dedicate those Communityworks funds, that will help us to determine other funding strategies for other projects. So, you know, it might take a couple of sessions, but it will really indicate for staff to go into financial planning.
Great, thank you. Director Green?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, does this mean we are going to have a discussion as electoral areas in our own strategic planning session? Decoupled from the urbanites?
I think two things to mention is that for strategic planning, yes, there is a session planned one way, shape, or form or another for electoral area priorities. And the discussion on the Communityworks funds at this time is just with the electoral area directors. Having said that, though, I think we need to be aware that there is opportunity to work with municipalities and perhaps look at projects that are more regional, and is there a way for them to share in those particular projects with their own Communityworks funds too? That may be part of the discussion.
Right. Did you have a follow-up, Director Ray?
Well, just to reiterate, Madam Chair, that, you know, my concern is the fact that the electoral areas quite often seem to get a little bit of a short shift whenever there's money being presented. And it ends up flowing out of the electoral areas into our major municipality, into services there and initiatives that occur there. So I do think that we have to maintain rural focus on this as much as possible, because this is our only chance. Thank you.
Great point. Thank you. So I don't see other questions. I'm going to call the question on receipt first. So all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. And Director Arbor, did you want to do the wording for you?
Yeah, I'll move that dedicated session to consider allocation of the remaining Communityworks fund to the end of March 2024 be held at the Electoral Area Services Committee. We don't have a precise date, in the fall of 2021, leading into 2022-2026 financial planning deliberations.
That's moved and seconded. Are there any other comments on that recommendation? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. And recommendation 2 has been moved and seconded regarding the unspent allocation of Communityworks funds being released back into the uncommitted balance. Any questions? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. All right, we're moving on to new business. We have a proposed amendment to the Rural Community Valley, Comox Valley zoning bylaw number 520, correspondence from Director Arbor of July 27th for receipt.
I'll move correspondence to be received.
Moved and seconded. And would Director Arbor like to speak to it?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yeah, so as per the correspondence, I'm introducing a bit of a policy proposal to look at something that is definitely a little bit ambitious in relation to our climate action. This would see basically within our zoning bylaws phasing out the permissibility of the sale of petroleum at automotive service stations. So the policy context is very important here. We have, and I'll talk about some of the triggers for this. In 2019, the province of British Columbia has basically declared that by 2040, the sale of all light-duty vehicles will be zero emissions. Pretty ambitious target. I thought we had lots of time. Last month, on June 29th, the federal government announced the same goal, but for 2035, which is only 14 years away for the sale being zero emissions. These are massive transformations in our transportation infrastructure. And of course, this morning, we received the IPCC sixth assessment report, which is using language code red, irreversible damage, need for transformative action. I'm actually not trying to, what do you say, to posture around this. I'm actually looking for ways that local government can assist the province and federal meet our goals. There's a long history of society missing its climate targets because often we just stick to what we know. We don't take greater chances. And most importantly, we've never actually challenged our addiction to petroleum in a very serious way, other than some of the pipeline protests we saw in British Columbia around trying to get oil to market. And at local government, what I'm trying to think is, how do we smooth the transition? And we are spending a tremendous amount of energy in trying to build out the alternatives. So we're trying to build out transit, increase the budget for transit. We still have 5% ridership. We try to install electric vehicle stations at our own cost. Very expensive to do. We have all these different measures that are currently on the back of local government. So now I'll talk about how typically governments wean themselves off of things that they don't want. For example, coal or cigarettes. There's usually two policy options. One is to regulate it out. So what the province and the federal government is doing on the car industry side is to regulate out the sale of petroleum-based cars. The other approach is taxation, to start to overtax the things that you don't want. And we saw that with cigarettes and things like that. So when I think about all the expenditures that we are envisioning around trying to compete, if you will, with gas stations and the rest of it to entice people into electric cars in the next 14 years and to get them habituated, it may be a good signal and action to actually start phasing out the availability of petroleum stations and petroleum at gas stations, and to incentivize the private market, once you take away that right, to actually invest in hydrogen and electric energy infrastructure rather than government having to do it. So it's performing our role as a regulator as opposed to the people who are going to install all of the new infrastructure at our own cost. I can guarantee you that companies are not going to change until they're going to wait right till the end. They're going to keep selling and people will keep driving their cars. We need to assist the province and the federal government in reaching their goals, and we have a role to play. So it's, I know I wouldn't have presented that even 5 years ago. This seems a bit far-fetched, but with the kind of timelines that we're not putting in, I think a lot of the public and policymakers are looking for more decisive actions. And this is what this proposal attempts to do. What I'm asking today is simply to open the consideration. I realize that this would definitely need a staff report to look into it. There will be myriad implications. I've already got a little bit of signal around what exists in the Comox Valley. In 2007, we already narrowed the number of properties that can have automotive service stations to begin with. We now have 3 zones. In the rural areas, we have 6, I think, or 7 gas stations that could potentially be affected by that change. And again, the change proposed doesn't mean that they stop fueling tomorrow. I've had that question quite a few times over the last few days. It would take away the permissibility, so they would become legally non-conforming. just like people have a shed or whatever on their lot, and over time, it just cannot be replaced. So it's not as drastic as an action, and we don't have the authority, frankly, to stop the sale. But over time, it would really stop the growth of gas stations, limit the capacity to expand, and also have a sunset clause that if for whatever reason the activity ceases, then you cannot sell petroleum anymore. So, and finally, one last point. I realize petroleum will be part of the mix, and perhaps we would, and part of the staff report, we would have to look at having zones where that perhaps municipalities have around card lock sites. There's definitely equipment and machinery and other things that will probably need to rely on petroleum. So we would have to look at some of those options, but to stop catering to 100% of the population and really cater to the few percentage that actually really needs it, because the alternatives are not there yet to satisfy their needs. So happy to pass it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Arbour. Director Grieve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you allow me a little latitude on this. Okay. Now, with only 7% of our total tax dollars going to local government, and given that this revenue stream is based only on assessed property values, where only actual property owners pay municipal taxes, this proposed bylaw seems to be more about appearing to be doing something about climate change by using municipal powers over zoning, when in actuality what is needed is a broad, bold international action by national governments. Often this board seems to focus on poverty reduction, housing, childcare, healthcare, mental health and addiction, climate change, and a host of other issues that, although very laudable, are clearly not in the purview of municipal local government. I fully sympathize with the mover. This summer has brought home the extent to which we all find ourselves in a climate crisis with droughts, floods, wildfires, etc. But we lack both the resources and the regulatory authority to continually take on more and more as senior government shirks their responsibilities and kick this can down the road. Maybe some of our local politicians made a mistake and should instead have run for provincial or federal seats where they would have a better chance of directing these policies. Both the federal and provincial government have multiple sources of revenues. In addition to income tax, they also have PST, GST, import duties, gas, cigarettes, alcohol, etc. Their tax base is more widely distributed across the broad population. As local government, we are limited and cannot continue to finance initiatives that will raise taxes only on Comox Valley homeowners. I think what needs to be said is we should stick to our knitting, and I'll save the rest of it for the actual motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. I have a couple of comments myself before I hand it back to Director Arbour. First of all, I really want to applaud Director Arbour for bringing this forward. It is quite a bold statement that we're making as a community if we decide to go down this process. And it's one that I think is needed. I hear Director Grieve's comments about us moving outside of our bailiwick, but at the same time, I look at when local governments signal to the province that we are ready to take bolder action, that we are often the ones that push the province to do that action. Sometimes they're waiting for us. Very similarly to what I find our own electorate, they're the ones that push us. And when we see that they're ready for us to make bold moves, we follow our electorate. So I agree with the idea behind wanting to phase out the infrastructure that's embedded in the fossil fuel sales. I had a couple of questions, and we'll bring it up now before we sort of go into the actual motion. But If the regional district decides to do this, I'm just wondering how the municipalities would also then respond. Is this something that only the electoral areas, this bylaw would only really exist in the rural areas? And I want to make sure that the intent of phasing out petrochemical gas stations occurs and that we don't actually push them into the municipalities. So, I just want to flag that, the regionality, and I think we do need to have the municipalities on board. As Director Arbor did mention, we still have, and we will have for a number of decades, gas and diesel vehicles. And so the sale of those, of gas and diesel is still going to be required. And what impact this type of proposal would have on the insurance for those companies that still have to actually sell and be non-conforming. So that's going to be a question as well. And then lastly, there is one issue that isn't covered here. And, I saw this a little bit on the conversation in social media around basically as more and more electric vehicles come online, it is primarily people who can afford to purchase electric vehicles that can take advantage of them. The current grants and subsidies provided by the province and the federal government don't allow for secondhand electric vehicles to be subsidized or with grants, or very limited, I should say. And I just want to point out the equity question then is are we making it more and more difficult for people who are of lower income tax bracket, who maybe can't afford the capital outlay to purchase? I mean, over long term, obviously operating an electric vehicle is so much less expensive. And I know Director Arbor and I have this experience that we are driving by the petrochemical, the gas stations right now, and gas is at $1.66. And I'm just like, wow, I'm saving quite a few $1,000s not having to gas up anymore. But it did require that initial capital outlay to purchase a vehicle. And how do we incentivize the purchase? So that question still exists in my mind, to make this an equitable transition for everyone. So those are just some of the comments and questions that I have in my head. But I'm going to hand it back to Director Arbor, because I'm sure you have a couple of statements to make too.
Yes, thanks to my colleagues for the feedback. And I think your feedback hones in on exactly the type of public debate that we would expect to see should this move towards zoning amendment and public hearings and all the rest of this. There's a lot of complexity. I'll address two key points, and one each. One from Director Grieve in regards to the tax burden of local government and what we carry on. Part of my proposal is actually to save us money, to save the taxpayers of the Comox Valley, because right now there's two courses of action. Well, sorry, there's always a third one, which is inaction, right? And that's fine if we don't want to act, but we have made the climate crisis hard. The second course of action is to do as we saw in the prior item, to invest in electrical infrastructure and all these different things that typically the private sector does a better job at. And that's actually my feedback to the province too. They've installed a number of electric stations at a pretty hefty cost, likely to compared to what the private sector could do. The private sector is not yet attracted to that infrastructure in the energy realm, because you're competing with a petroleum station and the convenience of it, and you don't have all of those things are going to have to change if we're going to meet those targets in 14 years from now. So the way I'm trying to save taxes is, instead of getting in the infrastructure game, you regulate out what you don't want, which is the sale of petroleum, and you let the private sector start to wrap their minds a little more and innovate around the new infrastructure for the future. Unless as a society we decide we want to be in the public infrastructure of those services. But that is a question for higher level of government. the one that I'm interested in from Chair Hamir is being the first. You know, if we do it and the municipalities don't do it, I believe this is one of the main reasons why we have failed to make our climate targets for the last 30 years around the world. One of the core arguments, even in Dr. Greaves' comments, was, you know, well, we better look at China and India, and why be the first? Why put ourselves at a competitive disadvantage? This is Thomas Harding stuff, tragedy of the commons, where people are like, I don't want to be the first. I'm putting myself at a competitive that you do it first, right? We've done this around the world. So at some point, the leadership has to come from somewhere. And when I thought about this proposal, I believe we are the best jurisdiction in North America to do this. You know, British Columbians have for years been on the forefront of climate leadership. If this would die in a heartbeat, obviously, if I was a councillor in Alberta, right? So we are actually have the highest rate of adaptation of the new vehicles in British Columbia across Canada. People have the appetite for change. And second, as Dr. Grieve mentioned, this summer, right? One of the big trigger for my proposal, 2 massive heat waves, impacts on Bain Sound, the shellfish, fires across British Columbia, right? Droughts. Should I go on and on? Like, British Columbians are feeling it. So I'm not saying that I'm going to die on the cross with this one. I'm saying that if people are asking to debate policy options that will move the dial, there's a role for local government, and this one will do it and save us money as local government. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve.
Thanks very much. Well, you know, at the risk of sounding like an OWG, which I surely am, and not wanting to, you know, drive a wedge in between the righteous cloak of purity and the dirty gas and coal industry, I think we have to get real and look at something in the middle. For instance, how many electric vehicles do we have out there right now? So, I mean, electric car charging stations, I drive by them quite a lot. I don't see too many charging people in there getting electricity. So it's all great, but in the real practical world, I'll give you an example. About 24 years ago, we built the Inland Island Highway, Highway 19. And there was an agreement over that highway, a memorandum, that there would be no fast food, grocery stores, gas and go type gas stations along the route. And as a result, a good friend of mine who is a former manager of Mount Washington Ski Resort said that you would not believe how many people landed up here in the middle of winter with an empty gas tank. Because the last gas station they saw was in the noose at the bottom of the speed trap there. And the next one they're going to see is probably in Campbellton when they go across the Campbell River on the way to Port Hardy. So I would say that if you're going to bring in this kind of sort of very draconian legislation around petrochemicals, that you have to make some exemptions for places like Mount Washington, if it does grow, where they maybe would they have to just apply for an exemption on this bylaw then? You know, I just think we have to be careful not to be overreaching, because there's unforeseen consequences to everything. And we've seen that ourselves, even in our own little Fisher-Price level of government. So I would think certainly, you know, bring on the conversation. Let's have a conversation around this. But as I said before, you have to be careful not to move too far, too fast, because what happens is you lose a whole segment of the population. And what's really important is to bring everybody along on this journey. So I would just caution the mover, and I understand all the very heartfelt reasons why he's bringing this forward, but we have to bring everybody along. Everybody has to be part of this solution. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Reed. Before I turn it back over to Director Arbor, I'm just going to make the point that generally electric car owners, they charge at home, which is why you don't see them at the charging stations. That's usually tourists who are coming through who have run low, those are the people who generally charge at charging stations. And my understanding is Director Arbor's his proposal isn't to get rid of all the gas stations. They're still going to be there. We're hopefully not going to have any more new gas stations, but I'll let Director Arbor speak to that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I believe it is within our powers, although sometimes we think that some things are within our powers and they're not. So we saw the single-use plastic issue, but that finally got freed up by the province. I don't have all the answers around this, and I think that's fair to say when you start a conversation. But giving consideration to that, I think, is important. There's definitely people, as Dr. Grief says, that are not going to come along with that, to be honest, and I'm already hearing from many of them. But at the end of the day, as I answered a couple, if you don't believe in the IPCC report that just got released and all the work over the last 30 years in identifying climate risk, if you don't believe in the federal targets that are part of our federal climate plan, if you don't believe in the provincial climate plan, which actually Gord Campbell in the 2000s actually really moved the dial with us, and the NDP has kept the light going. If you don't believe in none of those things, this proposal makes no sense, right? It's actually, yeah, it makes no sense. But if you have a concern about climate change and you realize that we need some policy that will move us in the direction that we want, there is no doubt that you need to tackle petroleum cars and that we need to prepare for the infrastructure of the future. This is one possible way to do it. Maybe in the course of the dialogue and conversation, we'll find better ways. But I think it's good, and I already know other municipalities and jurisdiction will pay attention to this as to how we move through this. So, anyways, for today, I'll close. I think I've said enough, and I hope that this is supported to at least move it to the conversation and for getting a staff report around the implications over the next coming months.
Thank you. Director Grieve? Oops.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Okay, but if you really want sustainable change, you really want to be effective, we're looking at perhaps a federal election writ being dropped any day. Here is a real opportunity for the public in a democracy to rise up and say, okay, enough's enough. I mean, if you just look back to, say, my parents' day, before Canada declared war on Hitler's Germany, people were still taking their horses and cart to town to get their goods and bring back to Merville or what have you, right? After the war, we had buzz bomb cruise missiles, V-2 rockets, right up to an atomic bomb that devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's stunning. Why? Because they commanded the economy. They said, this is a crisis. This is a war. And everything was dedicated to that effort. Well, I would say that nothing less is needed right now. I mean, it's all very well and fine to say, well, we're not going to build any more gas stations, but we want real change. This is all just pandering to our base. I mean, in a way, we're always playing to the sports fans here, but it's time to leave that all behind, to work together on something that is totally tangible, totally real, totally doable, but it's going to take powers much greater than us to do that. Sure, we'll send a message, somebody might notice, but really, folks, if anybody out there in TV land, or I guess laptop land nowadays, get off your duff and vote in the next election. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Grieve. I'm going to call the question now. I think we've had a pretty good discussion on this. First, we will move on receipt. All those in favor of receipt? Any opposed? And that's carried unanimously. And there is a requested action. I will second the requested action as well. So it's been moved and seconded That staff be directed to bring forward a report concerning a potential amendment to rural Comox Valley zoning bylaw number 520 to change the definition of automotive service station to exclude petroleum-derived fuels, and further, that this report be provided to the Electoral Area Services Committee with other proposed administrative amendments planned for early 2022. Are there any other comments or questions on that requested action?
Madam Chair, just to clarify for the directors so that you can, your expectations are met or not. With this requested action adopted, the report that we will bring back to you will not analyze the implications that this has to climate change or broader issues. It will be a report that will take a look at the proposal. Does it meet the muster in terms of land use planning and our authority? And what do staff sort of anticipate in terms of the process that would be required to go through a public hearing process or otherwise, and what the schedule might look at? Those are the kind of information pieces that I perceive that we would be providing to you unless you direct us otherwise.
Thanks, Russell. I'm seeing nodding around the table, so that's understood. I don't see any other questions or comments. I'll call the question on the action. All those in favor? Any opposed? Director Greaves opposed, and that is carried. Moving on, we have an addendum. Are there any items to consider? Correspondence? No? No media questions. And then we have a recommendation to move in camera under 91E and 91K of the community charter. Moved and seconded. Anyone opposed? And that's carried. We'll be moving in camera and we'll take a break. Yes, thanks. Actually, is lunch here or? Oh, I see it. Do you want to grab a lunch?